Hey guys, my name is Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So if you watched the last video, then you probably got to see the creation of this project. If you didn't watch it, basically all I did was just go through a quick review talking about some of the stuff we did before and just going through the various things that I told you were fundamental and kind of showed you how the things I taught were, things you're going to do in pretty much every single project. So if you didn't watch that, then it's up to you whether or not. If you think you're really good on what you've got down so far, then feel free to just skip that video. But if you're kind of still just watching videos and really learning about it more than you're applying stuff and getting good at being able to identify things quickly, then I strongly suggest you check that video out. So anyway, today we're going to talk about various plugins here. Now the first thing I want to do is get our synthesizer and route it to a mixer track here so we could actually have access to it, and we'll just rename and color this one to synth, and I'm gonna make it red just so that it stands out very obviously. There we go. So the first plugin we're going to talk about is EQ. And now there's a couple EQ plugins here. You'll notice that actually they're down something called filters, and we'll kind of talk about that we'll talk about why that is, in a couple minutes here. But the first thing I want to talk about is how a lot of these plugins tend to work. And essentially the fundamentals for almost, whoops, that was the wrong button. The fundamentals for almost all of these is pretty much based on two main principles. And that's going to be volume and delay. So essentially what you're getting is each of these plugins is taking the concept of volume and changing it up in their own unique way, and kind of messing it up in the original sense of just louder and quieter, and taking that louder and quieter and applying it in very interesting ways. And then delay is just getting a sound and waiting for a certain amount of time before you play it back. And you'll find out that a lot of these are based off that general principle. So, but the first couple of ones we'll cover are more so focused on volume than they are delay. So, so without further ado, let's get into this. So this is an EQ. And I did mention that I would talk about why they're down filters. So before I forget about that, I'll talk about that right now. So each of these here is called a band or a filter, whatever you want to call it. And we have 7 of these, and they are all exactly the same. What they do is kind of dependent on how you set it up. So if I right click this here, you'll notice it says band 1, and we could reset it, which basically just sets it back to the default location, or we could change the type or order. Now, order only matters for certain types, and we'll talk about these in a minute here. So the first one I want to talk about, for the sake of doing things like this, we're just gonna turn this one off and put it on the master channel because it'll be much more obvious if I do it there. Drop the EQ on there, and if I change this to now, if I change it to disable, it just won't do anything. So there's no point in really talking about that one or showing what it does. But first, we'll go to low pass. And what that does is it makes this little curve here that you can kind of tell. This area is lighter than this area. Now, that basically means that this is what your sound is going to be shaped by. So it's kind of filtering your sound. And that's where the premise of filter comes from, why they're all down the filter section here. So it filters the sound in such a way that it changes it. And I'll talk about how this all relates to volume in a minute here. But for now, you could tell if I pull this right and left, it will do more or less. Like if it's all the way over here, it'll actually only cut off this amount. So you see this area here that is no longer shaded. That's the area that's going to be cut out. So if I increase this, all we're going to have left is this small region here. And I think I clicked something wrong there. Yep. Oh, I accidentally clicked the gain here. So we'll bring that back down. Let me hit Alt and click to reset that to default. There we go. So So if I have it all the way over here, we only have this small region left that's going to be let through. So now the question is, what is this area? Now the best way to see this is actually if we go up here. So if you watch this little window here when I play back the track, now it might look different for you. If you click it, it might look like this. So you may need to click it once. Essentially what happens when the track is playing back is all the sound, which is just fundamentally waves being sent out by your speaker, can be broken down and kind of viewed in this sort of spectrogram way. So that's just a fancy word for analyzer, which we use a lot more often. So analyzer is the term that's generally used. You can see that we have something kind of similar here. So the brighter the color is in the background, the more sound we have coming through. You kind of match it up. So with that in mind, we could start to break down what the general sounds here are. So the easiest way to do that is by taking this filter and moving it, and it'll actually show you as I start to cut off these bits what it sounds like. Whoops, that was the wrong one. Let me reset that again. And so just listen as I pull this down. Sweet, so you kind of get an idea of what's going on there. I mean, there's really no better way for me to explain it other than what we have here is highs, what we have here is lows, and everything in the middle is mids. So, so that's the whole premise of an EQ. We are basically cutting or increasing the volume of certain areas. So if we have this right here, it's decreasing all the highs by however much is above this line. So if you see it says negative 18 right there, that means we're reducing it by greater than negative 18. Right here is negative 18. If we go to negative 12 here, follow the line, that is decreasing it by negative 12. So it kind of changes. Now, time to go on to the different filters here because you'll find out that it's a lot more fun when you learn what you can do with all these. So we're going to actually click through some of these pretty quick, and then what I'll do is show you some of the other tools around here. So the next one is a band pass, which is like a combination here. Let me show you the other one actually. So first we have the low pass, which we talked about. Then we have the high pass, which is the opposite of a low pass. So it cuts the low end and gradually brings it up. So if you listen to this. So it's the opposite of what we had before. Now, if we get a band pass, it's like getting both of those and sticking it into one. So that's the sound that's actually used rather often in terms of effects. So we have low pass, band pass, high pass, and then we have band stop. Now this one's kind of like a weird gouge in the middle. You probably won't use this one that often. It definitely creates an interesting sound, but the reason you won't use this one as much is because we have peaking. I do realize I just skipped over one, but if you look now, we have this little bump that can go up or down. So like the band stop that we had, it just cut things, but this one we could actually move up or down, and we could get two different options here. Or so that's what that is, and you can probably see stuff moving over here, and you're probably starting to get an idea of how things really work. So last two are low shelf and high shelf. So low shelf is just that. It's like a shelf here, and it allows us to boost or cut in a sort of shelf sense. So instead of just completely cutting things out like the high pass, so if we go to high pass, it completely cuts things out, and we can't move it up or down. But if we go to the low shelf, we can move it up or down, and we could, we could bring it all the way down and do that, bring it all the way up and do that, and just have fun with that. So it gives us a little bit more control over how much we cut in those areas. Or we could boost. That's more what low shelves typically are used for. Or not so much low shelves, but low shelves and high shelves are typically used for boosting and subtle cuts instead of going all the way down. So that's pretty much all of them. And now if I talk about some of the other things, now this one's one you're gonna have to experiment on a little, just because it starts to get funky. So if we go to peaking and have a peak here, then we could get the bandwidth and decrease it or increase it. So now this very drastically changes the tone, so I can kind of show you here. So, and what you really do with this is, it's kind of like fine tuning how much you're kind of boosting or cutting, because you could tell that when I started increasing it, it sounded like it was doing a lot more than when I had it lower. So it's a way to fine tune things. Now, the reason I said this one's weird and you'll have to play with it is because if you go to low pass and you have the bandwidth like that, it'll actually add this weird resonant peak, and the tone of this is very iconic. As opposed to just taking this like that and then just sliding it down. It gives that nice ring to the sound. So that's one you'll definitely want to play with. And order here, I'll talk about really quick. This is basically when you have these high cuts, low cuts. By the way, that's another name for the low pass. Low pass is a high cut because it cuts the highs, and high pass is a low cut because it cuts the lows. So it's interchangeable names. They're opposite. It just depends on which one you prefer to say. For me, I'll just say any given one for any given situation. So be prepared to hear both. But we have our low pass right now, and I could change the order. And first of all, if you watch the bandwidth on this one, I can make it steeper or smoother, but it kind of goes to a certain extent. There's kind of like a limit. I can only really make it go that steep. So if I go to the order and change it to gentle 4, you'll notice it gets a lot steeper. Gentle 6, and then gentle 8. And you can tell each one it gets a lot steeper. And even if I increase the bandwidth or decrease it, it still doesn't change as much as changing the order here. So 2 is the default one, and that's for a smoother sort of cut. And that's probably one you'll use a lot when you're just trying to roll things off, and we'll talk about that later. But the next tool we have here is, or not next tool, but the next type you can see here is Steep 4, Steep 6, and Steep 8. Now this one's kind of like adding more resonance to it. So you can see that if we go this one, I think there should be a visible difference between these two. Boom, yep. There's a lot more resonance on the steep one. And you kind of choose this one when you want it to go like straight down like that. You notice how there's a very quick bend there. But if I go to the gentle 4, I can only do so much, but because notice now if I try to make it like that, it starts to bump up instead. So basically that's the steepest we can make it. So it rolls off a lot slower than this one. So you can see there what we did. It changes how quick it rolls off. So, and now time to talk about what we really use EQ for. Now, one of the most obvious things you would probably do is, let me just reset this one and change the type to low shelf. And so what you would usually use this for is, just going around and finding different sounds and boosting them or cutting them depending on how much you like them. And now what a lot of people say when you go into mixing, which we'll talk about in a lot more depth later, is that you cut out spots for sound. So like, let's say you want to put an instrument in this area, then you get all your other instruments, cut them right there, and then you'd put your new instrument right there. That's like in terms of, if you think about it in terms of what you're artistically doing, that is correct. But in terms of practical use, you should never, ever, ever be doing that. Now, there is actually a few exceptions to the never case, but for the most part, you will be making artistic decisions instead of actually technical decisions. So if you have a sound that that a lot of the sound comes from around here, then you might want to boost it right there. Yeah, but that doesn't mean you have to cut everything else exactly right there. That's the wrong approach. So the way we EQ instead is we take sounds that we kind of want to increase or decrease and just artistically work with them. So in this case, I have it on the master channel, so it's not a great demonstration here, but I could show you. So one of the first things people probably do upon getting an EQ and slapping something underneath it is they'll do this. Because everyone likes more bass and more treble. That's really what everyone likes to do. And I'll be honest, that's kind of one of the things that I like to do when I'm tuning my audio systems for just like home listening and stuff. So it's a very pleasing thing when you have a lot of bass and a lot of treble for the most part. And you could probably tell here, I didn't mention it, but these are just the amount that things go up and down. The gain, as it's called, which is basically the volume for a particular band or filter. Notice how all these words are tying into each other? And if we go turn this one up, this is just the frequency. Nope, not this one. This one is just the frequency, and it moves it side to side, which I've been doing mostly by just grabbing it and moving it around. So you can kind of see what's happening there. But I won't talk about these just because they're not as important by any means. They're nowhere near as important. But anyway, back to what I was talking about by why you would EQ this. I know this video is going on a little bit longer than my other videos, but this is very important. So a good example is not having an EQ on the master here, and then going to my synth and adding an EQ here. Now, if I find what my synth sounds good on, then I could start to accentuate things and make it sound better. So first of all, let's just play this back and kind of listen to the synth. I'm gonna cycle this area. See if I can do this. Shift, here we go. So we got this region cycled, so we don't have to worry about it going into this area. So now you might be wondering why the heck I just did that. Well, if you notice when I turned this up, the synth kind of sounded, it sounded like it was better in a sense. It sounded more present. It sounded more accentuated. It sounded like I was pushing the synth to be brighter and to kind of have a better tone. And then when I pulled this up, you're probably wondering what the heck I was doing because it really didn't sound all that good. So that's where EQing comes in. We boost the things that we like, and we get a high pass here and cut the things we don't like. So we really don't need this low end here. So I'm just going to change the order to gentle 4 and change the bandwidth so it's a bit tighter there. And we're going to pull this up until it starts affecting the sound. So what we did here is we just cut off all this excess stuff that we really don't need because it really doesn't sound good, and you can't even hear all that much anyway. So that's kind of the general premise of what we're going to be doing. And for a kick drum, you'd probably do something different. You'd go to your kick drum here, drop an EQ on, and chances are you'd want to boost here instead. And this nice talk in the middle doesn't really sound any good. The talk sound. Let me solo this here. Right click the kick. The talk sound doesn't really sound good, so maybe we'd cut that. And it sounds more like a hi-fi kick drum. Now, personally, I would not make a kick drum like this, just because I'm just gonna be honest, I hate this kick drum sample, so there's nothing I can do to fix it. But it's just kind of an example of what you would do to, when you like a sound, you would boost it, and when you don't like a sound, you would cut it. So. So you kind of see what I'm doing there. I'm starting to make sounds so that they kind of fit better together. They each have their own spot, and that's really what it breaks down to. It's all about getting sounds in the right spot. And when you start to get like 20, 30 tracks, you'll notice right now we don't have that many. We only have like 5. Then there's really not that big of an issue with things conflicting. But when you get to like 30, 50, 80, 100 tracks, things start to get pretty crazy, and you really have to be precise about your decisions with EQing. Now, I am not going to advocate that any of the decisions I made in this video are necessarily good, just because, like I said, for the example of the kick drum, the only reason I was showing you stuff is I was showing what you might do when you first pop it open and you hear this kick drum and you're first trying EQ. Not necessarily the correct way to do it, because the correct way to do it is, first of all, to not use this kick. It's a terrible kick, and there's really not a lot you could do to make it sound better. You need a different kick sample. So, sounds like a mean thing to say to the kick, but realistically, that's kind of the situation. So what I'm saying here is don't focus on so much like what I chose and how to replicate it. Instead, use your ears. Just listen and think, what should I accentuate in this sound? Or what do I really not need in this sound? And try to tune your ears so that you know how much you could boost or how much you can cut to keep it so it sounds its best. So that's pretty much it. Now, the one thing I probably didn't mention here, but you may have already noticed, is each of these bands is 100% the same, and it doesn't matter which one you use for what. I could get this one and do a boost over here, and or I could get, you know, this one and make it a high shelf, and, you know, do that. It really doesn't matter. It's all up to you and your choices. So, and this is something I kind of messed with in the beginning. It's just the master gain. So it's basically like another level of volume you can mess with. So if you boost a lot of things, then you could counter that by pulling the whole thing down in the end. So you could kind of balance out the level. But that's something that's not so important right now, but you'll learn is pretty important later. So, anyway, let me just pull this last back a bit, and hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I really, you know, there's different EQs here. Let me pop open one just to kind of show you. If I pull up EQ, this one is the same general premise, except we could kind of do things like that instead. But you'll notice it's the same thing. We could boost the low ends, cut the mids, and then boost the highs again, and it's just the same as doing this one. Tone will probably be slightly different, but that's, you know, that's that. And we could go in and have parametric EQ1, which is basically, it gets rid of this graphic interface and just kind of has this. So we could boost or cut, then we have our frequencies, and then we have our bandwidths. So actually, you know what, you can see down here some of the things that we're doing. There we go. So you can see it's got the same layout. It's just not as fancy looking and, you know, not as flexible per se in some cases. So, so yeah, those are some of the basic ones. You'd look those over and have fun with those. But anyway, hopefully this was helpful for you guys, and hopefully you got kind of a taste as to what EQ is for. Once again, it's not for slicing out spots in your mix. While that is the concept artistically, it's not what you should actually do. So if I boost here, that doesn't mean I'm going to go into my my kick drum or something, pull up the EQ in the kick drum and do the opposite of what I did here. Now, some cases you might do that, but it's more likely you're going to be worrying about having each track so it shines on its own, and then working all the tracks together instead of doing this whole, you know, do a boost and then a cut in the exact same spot. That's just something I really want to ward away from. Because it's something that you could easily get caught into doing, but really remember, EQ is very artistic and somewhat technical. But you want to make you can make a lot better artistic decisions and than you can technical decisions when it comes to EQ. But anyway, rambling on a little bit. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys. Once again, I apologize that this video is longer than the other ones, but I really wanted to nail home this, send home, nail down, whatever, this whole concept of EQ and kind of the use cases for it. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.